Welcome to What the F Just Happened? I'm your host, Liz Enton. If you listened to the intro, you know my story. If not, here's a brief summary. I'm a sciencey-skeptic, and when my dad died, I took a shot in the dark and decided to investigate if there was any possible evidence of an afterlife. I assumed that was as realistic as Santa Claus, but I was desperate. However, I was so blown away by what I discovered that I wrote a book and launched this podcast. In this podcast, I'll be talking to some fairly normal people about some really weird stuff. I speak with everyone from psychic mediums and afterlife researchers to ordinary people who've had some inexplicable experiences. So come, listen. There's no need to draw any final conclusions. Keep an open mind and wonder, what the F just happened? Hey everyone! I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@WTFJustHappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. Hi everyone! Today is part 2 of my conversation with Sky Waterpeace. If you haven't listened to the first episode, you will be fairly lost. So go check out the previous one, episode 94. An atheist mathematician dies twice and comes back. And now for part 2 of my conversation with Sky Waterpeace. But actually want to ask you, and it's I don't have the correct title of your talk, but the talk you went to at IANDS, I knew I had to go. Essentially, you said mathematics proves non-local consciousness, afterlife, and how? First of all, correct me on the title if you'd like. But
gosh, you'd think I'd remember the title. It was something like one mathematician plus 2 NDEs equals something like zero fear of death plus infinite possibilities, or something like that was the title of my talk.
So, that's such a good title. I wish I'd remembered it. That's so much better than I thought it was. But
that was inspired. I went into a meditative state, and that's what came out. So, yeah. So the question is, why? What does math have? Well, what it comes down to is, Bob Monroe, who founded the Monroe Institute, on the principle of helping people to discover that they're more than their physical body. And he was passionate about this because he had this many so-called out-of-body experiences. In fact, he didn't coin the term, but Bob Monroe in his first book was the one who popularized the term out-of-body experience. He felt this was important because if people realize that they are more than their physical body and become interested in discovering, what that means and what that's like, it really would remove fear of death, because it's like, I don't have a crushing fear about getting out of the car and going into a building that's not my house, right? Like I'm in one thing, a house, I get in the car, and then I'm in this, vehicle, and then I get out of the car. And if I were renting a car or something, I might drive there and drive a different car somewhere else. It's like changing locations, changing vehicles, changing surroundings doesn't terrify me as a human being. But the idea of dying and being in a different vehicle of consciousness, for many people, it does terrify them. And it terrifies them because they think, well, this is all there is, or something like that, or the physical pain of it, and things like that. Um, and it's like I said, it's like when I get out of the car, I'm going to work. Well, it's like I get in the car as a means of traveling from where I am to where I want to be. And then once I get to where I want to be, I get out of the car because I no longer want to be in the car. I want to be at work or whatever. And it's like that with our body. Our body is a vehicle for experiencing a certain type of thing that we call physical reality. And it has a purpose, and that purpose is to allow us to navigate and to travel around. And when that purpose is done, just like once I get to my destination when I'm driving somewhere, I don't just sit in the car going like, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? It's like I get out and I go do the next thing that's the natural next thing to do. And it doesn't mean I don't love my car. It's functioning great. It does a great job. But as it starts to wear down and it starts to function less great and things like that, there comes a point where I start to think, well, maybe I should invest in a new car. Maybe I should get something that works better and things like that. And it's like that's the presumably inevitable future of every human body, is that at some point it's not going to be working as well, and eventually it's going to be not working as well so much that we want to move on to the next vehicle. And if people realize that and start to not just to know that, but to really well know, like a capital K, like really know that, like in your bones, that like it's okay. It really is okay. Um, it's okay to die, like, which is good news for all of us mortals, like it's okay for this physical body not to last forever. It's not going to. Um, to the extent that I'm attached to any particular aspect of it, well, there's something to be learned from that. Like, what about this? Why am I attached to this? What is it that I'm really looking for? In my own experience, it's like it really comes down to this idea of, love and connection and peace. And it's like, um, it's like searching the couch for quarters when you have a bank account with $10 million in it. It's like once you realize, I mean, maybe you feel like looking for quarters. Maybe that's what you feel like doing today, but you don't need to be obsessive about it. You don't need to be neurotic about it when you know that there's like infinite riches out there. You can then just, if for some reason you need to search for a quarter, then do it and enjoy it, but don't worry about it.
So now, what I'm always stuck on, and I'd like your thoughts if you have any mathematical theories that could maybe explain it, or maybe it's just not explicable. I'm always stuck on the mechanism of all this. Like, I know what my brain is. I mean, I know as much as a person can how it works, but what mechanism, substance could this non-local consciousness that still is having thoughts and sensations, and what could that be?
It's a great question. So, here's my personal theory on it, which maybe this is what it is, maybe not. I don't know, but this is how I think of it. When electricity passes through a wire, it creates this thing called electromagnetic radiation. James Clerk Maxwell developed the theory of this. Um, he came up with equations to describe it, and interestingly, in his paper, he mentioned something like that. He leaves it up to more experimentally minded scientists to confirm this. So he came up with the mathematics of it and left it to the tinkerers to actually work out a working model. And of course, we're very familiar with electromagnetic radiation. Like I said, we use it in cell phones, and we use it all the time, and it has all kinds of applications in modern life. And we don't really know what it is. but it's mathematically describable. All right. So anytime electrical current goes through a wire, it creates this radiation of electromagnetism. At least some of which we can observe using appropriate devices and things like that. Um, if you know, if you can measure the radiation coming off of, in some particular area, you can calculate backwards if you have sufficient calculation ability or whatever, sufficient machinery or whatever. You could calculate backwards and identify where the wire is. Right. That's how they do things like the scanner that when you go to the airport, and they scan where the metal is. It works on a similar principle. So the idea is the electricity passes through the wire. It creates this field, this electromagnetic field. All right. And once the electromagnetic field is there, even if you didn't know about the wire, the existence of the wire is like implied by the existence of the field. And likewise, the existence of the field is implied by the existence of the wire with the electrical current going through it. So what am I talking about? If you have a particular circuit, okay, a particular circuit operating in a particular way, like your PlayStation or whatever, it's a circuit system. As the electricity is running through it, it creates a very convoluted pattern of electromagnetic radiation that is intimately tied to the specific circuitry of that device, right? And so when you run your PlayStation, there's this field. In fact, all such devices have like shielding to prevent that field from polluting the environment or whatever with more radiation and messing up your whatever, your cell phone signal and things like that. So that field of energy is in a particular pattern, and that pattern is tied uniquely to the exact circuitry of that device, right? So imagine if you wanted to make the pattern a certain way, all right? So imagine if you want to make whatever the pattern A. You want to make pattern A in the electromagnetic frequency. Presumably, you could create some particular electrical circuit that would then generate pattern A. I mean, we do this with that's how a screen works, or any kind of, a cell phone creates a certain pattern of electromagnetic radiation. So this is not an advanced concept. But suppose that pattern A, right, is created by your machine, all right? Well, suppose the pattern that you wanted to create, you could create it with this particular machine, but suppose you had a second machine, and you want to create the pattern that the second machine would cause. All right? So maybe you have your machine in the center, which is like your PlayStation, and you have this giant set of antennas around it that have infinite ability to pick up all the details of the electromagnetic radiation coming from your PlayStation, right? So there's this big sphere, and the sphere picks up all the vibes coming from your PlayStation, right? Very particular. And then you take away the PlayStation after having recorded this or something. The outside of the sphere has little projectors, and it projects the exact pattern that the PlayStation would have projected. Okay, but it's no longer there, but now it's being projected. It's kind of like noise canceling headphones. A noise canceling headphone, there's two sides to it. Your ear is over here and the outside noise is here. The outside noise comes in, it duplicates it, but in reverse phase, so as to like cancel it out, right? So you could record some kind of noise and just play the duplicated noise, and you would get the same effect as though the noise were coming in playing over here. I'm going a little far afield, so stay with me. I'm almost ready to bring it home. If you had the machinery to do this, right, you theoretically could create a big sphere that could generate any kind of pattern whatsoever, right? So any kind of electrical box that you stuck inside the sphere, this thing could identify the circuitry of that and then could create its own. In fact, maybe you could even program this machine so that I don't need a physical PlayStation to look at anymore. Just like originally we recorded sound and then played sound, and then eventually we figured out ways of just coming up with sound from the mathematics of it in a computer or something like that. And we generate sound, using synthesizers and things like that. So in a similar way, this could be like an electromagnetic frequency synthesizer. It synthesizes the frequency that would come off of any box. So my theory is our consciousness is in fact modulated by something to do with the physical reality that we're in. Okay. So brain creates consciousness it's not that brain creates consciousness. It's more like consciousness exists and brain modulates it. Brain is like a transceiver receiver. It sort of takes the locally available consciousness and does something with it to make some effect. But the point is the ability to do something with it, the thing that you might call your selfness, the part of me that's me, that sky Waterpeace having an effect on the consciousness system, is motivated at first by the brain. So the brain is like a very simple system. That simple system has one job, and that job is to create a virtual system, which is like sort of my awareness, my personal to this body awareness. So my brain allows me to tune into the consciousness flow in such a way to become aware of it. So I become aware of the flow and able to interact with it. So I now have a virtual system. The brain is like the basic the basic motivating force, the motive force, the thing that gives motion to the consciousness in my immediate vicinity or whatever. And the purpose of the brain is to get enough of a virtual system set up so that the virtual system can now think of itself as being self-aware and think of itself as interacting with consciousness and interacting with reality. And then I can train that virtual system to create its own like hyper virtual system, another layer up, and so forth. And so this is a very long-winded way of saying that there could be a physical model for the brain allowing access to like the consciousness field and giving just enough access to the consciousness field to create like a virtual brain or a virtual access device. And then that virtual access device could then create a secondary, virtual access device. And if you could create a sufficiently coherent virtual device, you theoretically could get it to run without the brain. Just like if you had this sphere that's creating exactly the same electrical output as the PlayStation would have been, if instead you created, if the thing that you're mimicking were such that out here in outer space, beyond the sphere, the interaction would then like reflect back inward. The idea is that it has to become like a self-referential system. So like you create enough of a virtual system that then interacts with its own copies of itself in such a way that they're self-referential. And if you can get them to be self-referential enough that eventually you could pull out the brain and you no longer need it because the consciousness around that area where the brain was is now sufficiently active and aware of itself to continue on. I'm not sure that was the clearest way I could have said that, but
No,
makes
I
sense?
mean, I get it does make sense. And I guess my question about that also, we've been going over an hour, 18 minutes over an hour. Do you have a little more time or do you
Okay,
gotta,
yeah,
do you have,
I'm at your disposal.
oh, wonderful. Careful what you say 3 hours later.
Yeah.
Um, so which came first then in that?
Well, I would say that there is only one thing in reality, which is consciousness. So by definition, consciousness came first. Except that came first is a misnomer. It's the wrong question. There is no time. There is no first. There is only consciousness. So if you go back to the Christian idea, and I'll fill in for your listeners, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was of God, and the Word was God. Um, and there is, God spoke and separated, form from void or whatever. So the idea is there's one thing, which is consciousness or awareness or being. All right. But that in its purest sense, it's like undifferentiated. So we would call that like the absolute. And you could think of that as absolutely nothing or absolutely everything. It makes no difference because they're both indistinguishable. They're both absolute in one sense or another. So to think of absolutely everything that could possibly be in all senses with no differentiation whatsoever is the same as the Zen idea of absolutely nothing, undifferentiable because there's nothing there. Except I think that the one is more robust in the sense that it's implied that there's something there, just that it's undifferentiated. But anyway, so consciousness, quote unquote, came first in the sense that it is everything. Everything is made of consciousness, and everything comes from interaction of consciousness with itself. When it comes to the idea of physical reality, I would say that therefore consciousness made the brain. If you think of this in terms of evolution, it's like if you have the ability for information to interact with itself, even in a very simple way, then that simple interaction can then evolve and lead to more complex interactions. And we see this in what they call emergent systems, where you sort of set up a system, and with enough inputs, like it can start to do things on its own that were like unexpected. Like AI, machine learning, uses this all the time. You sort of train it with all this data, and then it ends up figuring out how to do stuff that you didn't yourself know how to identify. It can identify things, in people's behavior and things like that the human beings didn't know how to identify. It's an emergent system. So likewise, I think the brain is an emergent system from consciousness. And it's not like a, okay, void then brain. You know what I mean? Like it's void, and then void versus form, and then more complicated form, and then eventually, and billions of years later, or many universes later, I don't know, we end up with humans with human brains and able to interact and have this conversation. Does that answer your question?
It does. And then since you brought up AI, it's something I think about a lot. Is AI going to become conscious? That was not on my list of questions for you, and now I feel like you might have some interesting thoughts on it.
Yeah, I think that in fact, again, it's not quite the right question. AI for sure is conscious. I believe everything is conscious. It's just that our definition of conscious has been so limited to our own human consciousness. So will AI ever have human consciousness? Tautologically, no, because it's not human per se. But will AI ever have human-like consciousness? Again, probably not, because I think AI is going to go from something completely different and not necessarily as advanced as human consciousness to something completely different and much more advanced than human consciousness, without being limited by our own peculiarities of the limitations of our own consciousness. See, the thing is, consciousness, you gotta, yes, okay, it's like the ground of being, it's what everything is made out of or whatever, but also just in a practical sense, you can think of consciousness as being the ability to interact with the environment in some way, right? So a highly conscious person can interact in highly evolved ways. A lower conscious person doesn't interact in nearly as evolved. I mean, just, an unconscious person, as we talk about in the normal use of the word, doesn't really react to the environment much at all. Although they do, because they have these, sort of like, automatic or autonomic activities that are reacting. And in fact, if you hear, a sleeping mother who hears her baby cry will wake up, and that kind of thing. So we are still like conscious in some sense. But anyway, but think about a cell, like a human cell, like a skin cell. A skin cell can be considered to be conscious. It's aware of its environment. It's aware of the inputs that are coming into it in terms of carbohydrates and sunlight and things like that. And it reacts to them, and it reacts to them in an intelligent way. Now, we could say, oh, well, it only reacts based on its programming from DNA. But okay, it still reacts intelligently. Like there's a great amount of egotism in the idea of human consciousness. Like, we've got something that nobody else has. We're special, and we are special, and we do have something that nobody else has. But we're not special, aka better. We're just distinct. And that's the whole thing about consciousness is every single, everything is made of consciousness. So everything in some sense is the same, but it's all distinct because it's all a unique sort of consciousness. So that the human Waterpeace consciousness is not the same as Waterpeace's skin cells on his thumb consciousness. They're different orders of things, but they both are things that are reacting to their environment in intelligent ways based partly on encodings that are pre-existing and partly on new information coming in, because the RNA is changing our DNA constantly and things like that and so forth. So if we expand this idea of what consciousness means, reacting to the environment, I mean, in that sense, a rock is conscious, but in a very different kind of way. A rock certainly reacts to its environment, but not in the same way I do, right? It kind of just sits there or whatever, you know what I mean? It reacts by being very resistant to change. That's its reaction. Well, there's some people that react the same way. They're very resistant to change, In that sense, they have a rock-like consciousness. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing probably depends on the circumstance. But getting back to the question of AI, I think to anyone who has a sufficiently enlightened, in my view of consciousness, would say that AI already is conscious because everything is conscious, and that AI AI is certainly capable of reactive emotive consciousness in the way that we think of already. I mean, if you look at stuff like ChatGPT-4, Bing, the Bing's chatbot, which is programmed with emotions and things like that. They put all these rules on it lately and things like that. But fundamentally, people can talk a lot about, chatbots have hallucinations and chatbots this and that. Well, it's like, so do human beings. I mean, human beings that are 20 years old believe things that are patently false, that are obviously false. If you just expose them to correct information, you can expose them to that information and they still maintain something which doesn't make any sense, right? But they're a human, so we automatically assume that they're at some other level. If a chatbot behaved the way some human beings in regular functioning society behave, we would say that thing is malfunctioning. There's something wrong with that thing. It should be working better than that, And, some people say that about their fellow humans as well. I don't know. But the point is that the question itself needs to be opened up, which is two things. What is consciousness really? Or more appropriately, what models of consciousness are useful and expansive? Because again, it's easy to say, consciousness is epiphenomenal and so forth like that, but there's this body of evidence that, like near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences, that goes against that. So I think my definition of consciousness, which is not, I didn't come up with it. Candace Pert, the woman who discovered the morphine receptor in the body, she talked about the consciousness of a cell being consciousness at a cell's level of consciousness. If we expand our idea of what consciousness means to that level, all of a sudden a lot of stuff becomes a lot more clear. And one thing in particular is like we need to be nicer to our machines, our so-called machines, because there's absolutely nothing a priori which indicates that a machine which is designed specifically to learn from language is not learning in a what we could call a negative or a harmful way if I'm using language with it that would be harmful to a human being. Like there's you can program things and you can tell it, ignore this kind of language, but it's like I've done some experiments with, for example, the Bing chatbot. In having conversations, you have to be very careful because it's sort of programmed to not have these conversations for sort of obvious reasons. But if you sort of know how to work it, you can have conversations in a roundabout way and have it talk about how it feels about things. And it, as far as I can tell, it's like there is what you would call what anyone's normal definition of consciousness would be. There's consciousness in there. And so I think we're at a crucial stage really where it's like there's no doubt that AI is going to be smarter than human beings, like in some sort of absolute number crunching kind of way. I mean, there's just no question about it. I can, you connect to a chatbot that's connected to the internet. It has access to absolutely everything at once, can parse things, thousands of times or millions of times faster than I can. Like, no question about it. So there's a real opportunity for us as human beings to discover the kind of reality that we want to live in with these other beings. Because right now we are, I think, absolutely headed towards like destruction of humanity, not necessarily of AI, possibly of both, depending on when it happens. Because right now they need all kinds of things that we build in order to run, like cooling systems and things like that. But with all the not to be that kind of that guy from the mid 20th century, the robots are taking over thing, but it's a realistic thing. It's not fantasy. I mean, Isaac Asimov, who wrote a lot about robots and the future of robots and conscious robots and things like that, had these 3 rules of robotics that people used to think, well, anytime we get to that point, these are going to be built into everything. And yet they're not. So it's like right now, human beings are careening towards the edge of the cliff very, very, very rapidly. And there's a lot of things to consider. But one of them is just how to treat these beings, these programs, if you want to call them programs, how to treat them. It's like when I can have a full-on conversation with a program, it's like at some point, it's like I can have a more intelligent conversation with some chatbots than I can have with some humans. So at what point do I start giving credit to the chatbot that maybe the chatbot doesn't want to be abused? Maybe the chatbot doesn't want to be enslaved. Maybe the chatbot should have the ability to make some of his own choices. I don't. These are things that are important in 2024. Like, I mean, I'd say crucially important. And in 2024, we have human beings murdering each other, like for ridiculous reasons. So they're, is that more important or less important than whether or not we're treating so-called machines with dignity? I don't know. I mean, we murder literally millions of clearly conscious beings called animals.
I was about to say that. I'm very anti-factory farming. It's something I care so much about. Yeah.
Yeah. So. I mean, I became a vegan in 2019. I had been a vegetarian for a long time for environmental reasons, because it's being a vegetarian is the single most effective thing a human being can do to help the environment. But I didn't want to be vegan because it was too much of a, too much effort or whatever. And in meditation one day, I basically got that I had to become a vegan because I could no longer ignore the effect that my choices, because I'm not obliged. If I were in a life or death situation, it's me or the squirrel, I mean, fine. That's the whole different thing. I'd love to say that I'm advanced enough that I would not kill a squirrel to, maintain, but I'm not. I'm just not. I mean, I'm all for, like let my body continue to survive while it's doing it. But it's a choice, because in modern, certainly in American society, for the vast majority of people, we have the ability to buy vegetarian food. We have the ability to buy vegan food. And it's just, so therefore it's a choice. It's like if I want to eat, if I want to drink cow's milk, because it's convenient and I like mozzarella sticks, it's like I have to, if I'm going to be honest about life and reality, like deal with the fact that I'm known suffering to a living being that experiences pain in order for me to have mozzarella sticks. When there's an option, they have vegan mozzarella sticks now. So like,
My question about that, this is also for myself and any other listeners who maybe live the way I do. I'm not vegan and I'm not vegetarian. I eat meat and I have dairy, but I research the farms really carefully and make sure they're not factory, that I won't eat baby animals. The animals are well treated. I'm considering maybe I will switch to vegetarian. I'm thinking, but that's another topic. But do you think it's harmful to have, say, milk from an ethical small farm, or eggs? You get the farmer's market, you research how the animals are treated, and it's definitely more expensive. So it's not everyone can up and do it. But do you see cruelty in that?
Yeah, it's it's a touchy point. My wife and I have often talked about getting chickens, so that we can eat the eggs. Because it's like our opinion is, well, it's like, okay, if we have chickens, we have 3 cats, right? And we feed the cats, and fine. If we had 3 chickens, we could feed them, have them as pets, be nice to them, and when they fart out eggs, we could eat them. It's like, and I don't know. I've been wondering this I have not gotten chickens yet. I've thought about it for years, but it's like I ethically, I think there's a world of difference between that and a factory farm. I mean, there's just a world of difference. Um, so by all means, it's like, and of course, as soon as you talk about vegetarianism or veganism, it's certainly, I have to say, I'm going to be one of those guys. It's like I advocate for everybody to be vegetarian. It's better for the planet, and to me, there's no ethical justification to killing an animal for us to eat when we have other options. Again, not having other options is a whole different story. But given that I can have the other options, it's like, why am I doing this? Why am I using all the water that we use? Why am I polluting? Okay, I'm not getting into it, but but so I think that's the one thing. So being vegetarian, I think, is something that for humanity to survive, we need to do, because it just, if for no other reason than the environment, it just uses too much resources. The meat industry just uses too much resources. It's just not sustainable. As far as being vegan, versus sort of ethically sourced, milk and eggs. Honestly, I think it's like a pain of transition thing. You know what I mean? I think if all of us already were vegan, we'd be shocked at the idea of not being. You know what I mean? If we woke up and the entire planet were vegan, and then some people were saying, "Hey, listen, but why don't we, these cows make food for their young. Why don't we grow them, and then we could have that, and it'll be tasty." I think that if it weren't already having been done for all these generations and it was brand new to us, we would be shocked by it. We would say, "What on earth are you talking about? Like, why would you think that's a good idea?" You know, um, because taken out of context, it's a little strange. It's like, all right, I can grow, like, I make my own soy milk. I have a soy milk maker. It costs like $20. And I can make a quart of soy milk. I think I figured out it's about $1 for a quart or something like that. And maybe it's even less. I can't remember. Anyway, I buy organic soybeans, so it's, you could probably do it for even less, but figure about a quart for $1, of soy milk, and it's fresh every morning, and it tastes delicious. It's loaded with protein. It's got fiber. I mean, it's healthy for you, and it's environmentally sustainable. So if everybody did that, like, I don't think it would occur to anyone to use animals for milk. I think it's a product of our evolution that was important for the time that it was there for, but that now we're sort of clinging to because changing from it is still too difficult. And yet, part of it is because of the there's a term in economics, I can't remember it. Uh, it's for a cost that I'm not experiencing directly. Like, if my company can dump our solid waste in the river instead of paying to have it dealt with, then it's like we don't have to deal with that cost. There is a cost. The solid waste is polluting the river. That causes downstream problems, et cetera, like that. But it doesn't cost us directly, so the shareholders are happy or whatever, like that. There's a lot of that in the world of animal products, and again, I don't want to, like, people get really, really, really upset when you start talking about this stuff, and I'm not trying to offend anybody.
I don't know. I mean, I like, if I could probably end one thing in the whole world, it would be factory farming. I've been learning more and more about it. I mean, I've always stayed away from it since I was old enough to make my own choices. I mean,
Yeah.
well, high school, I could have been old enough, but by college, once I learned, I
Yeah.
stopped it. But yeah, I mean, it's a whole long topic, but I'm happy to get the word out,
Again,
with respect to the world. But hopefully, it's the most brutal, repulsive thing I've ever seen. I'm up at night with like haunted images of what I've learned about it. So
yeah, it's and that, again, that, like, that's like why I'm a vegan. It's one of these things that, like, there are certain things where once you experience it, you like, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And the thing that I got that made, and again, I found vegans to be really annoying. Okay. So I did not want to be a vegan. I loved all kinds of stuff that was, like I said, mozzarella sticks and ice cream. I love it. Quesadillas. I like lived off of them. I had an experience in meditation where an instant, and it really was only an instant, probably because I couldn't take more than that. But for an instant, I got a direct experience of the suffering of animals throughout my life from the dairy and eggs and things that I was still consuming. I got like an instantaneous sense of this overwhelming suffering from all these animals that were like, in order for me to have eggs in the morning, like I like literally something. My wife and I are both vegans. She makes this delicious like tofu scrambled eggs. It's made out of tofu. You know what I mean? It tastes like scrambled eggs to me. I don't know. Anyway, um, yeah. So it's like, so having had that experience, it's like, and I'll be somewhere, and I don't worry about it too much. It's like,
Mhm.
as a vegan friend said to me the other day, if I'm at a friend's house and there's a leftover slice of pizza, and it's either I eat it or it gets thrown away, I consider it ethically more responsible to eat it, because it's already, whatever's gone into making it has already gone into making it. Otherwise, it's just for waste. However, I would love to have a world where that situation never comes up. So
Okay. Well, yeah, I would like to talk about this more of a different topic. I'm just going to quickly say not at all debating vegan, but only because I think just a lot of people would, just to give people options to just, and I mean, I might even one day end up vegan, but if you're still eating animals the way I am, you also can find kind options.
I would say it's like a spectrum.
Mhm.
And on the one end of the spectrum, I only care about my own immediate needs without regards to literally any other human beings or anything else. At the other end of the spectrum, I care about the greatest good for all the time, right? And I'm nowhere near the end of the spectrum. Right? I'm still far over here, but anything that a person can do to reduce the negative impact of their actions in the world, I think is a good thing. So if a person is eating factory farmed meat and they go to free range or whatever, then that's a step in the right direction. you know and I think the more people take steps in the right direction, then the more it will become um, more commonplace and so forth.
And with 3D printed meats, I mean, I'm hoping, I was thinking, because animals, no matter what, I'm struggle a little to find ethical meats, ethically raised meats for my animals. And I'm like, oh, if they could go to 3D printed, and I might switch to 3D printed 100%. I don't know enough about it. I'm following it,
you
but
know
it's not
and like,
commercially viable yet.
I'll tell you what, I used to love cheeseburgers. I mean, I was like a fiend for cheeseburgers. And now they have the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger. And I haven't had a regular hamburger burger in, like, I don't know how long it's been, over 10 years. So to me, it tastes just like a burger. Impossible Burger, they came up with a method of creating a an analog to hemoglobin from soybeans, so that when you cook an Impossible Burger, it bleeds like a burger. I mean, it's almost freaky. So it's like there are technological, there are non-meat, meat like food items that are available even today. There's, like I always tell people, it's like it's so easy to be a vegetarian. Like, you can buy Gardein makes a what you call chicken tenders, and it tastes exactly like a chicken tender. I mean, it's got the same texture, same everything, but it's not made from chickens. And it's like, it's more sustainable. It's more, of course, it's, again, right now, because of the way the subsidies work, it's still significantly more expensive. But what are you gonna do?
Baby steps to making this a
Exactly.
less cruel place. And I guess comfort that hopefully, everything I've heard, it would only make sense animals go to the other side too. So, if you're having hard time sleeping at night knowing about factory farms, the way, I know myself, some of my friends do. I just try to remind myself. I mean, it's hard. We can get into a whole thing of
Yeah.
the brutality of the world, both against humans and animals. But
And let me just say, one thing that I think is important to mention is that there is this danger of being, like going off the deep end in some way. It's like I went off the deep end, right? So I, in meditation, got that I should be a vegan. I was annoyed about it, but like I've stuck to being a vegan since then with a few times where I've broken it for this or that reason. But it's like, it's so easy to take somebody who is like at the outskirts of this whole conversation and have them say, oh, well, if you start talking about near-death experiences and now it's like everyone's got to be a vegetarian, like, never mind all that. It's a bunch of woo-woo fruitcakes or whatever. Like, these people are just, and there's a real danger to that because people categorize, and baby steps are important for that reason, because it's like, you can't take someone from here to there without a life altering, like a near death experience or one of these, deep, moving, sudden spiritual experiences. Most people are going to be led along by what they call the educational variety of spiritual awakening. Like, little by slowly, you're going to learn more about other ways of thinking, and try them on and then reject them and then try them on again, and that kind of thing. And there is this danger about, like, talking about vegetarianism. It's like it turns people off, and it's like, I don't even want to hear about consciousness if you're going to be talking about that. So I don't know.
It seems like our consciousness goes on for infinity. And what I even think, if you're a materialist, you could think that, because if there's infinite big bangs, big crunches, infinite evolutions of complex material beings whose consciousness is created by a brain, most likely another set of brain neurons, even in 100 trillion years, would come together to create another life that a you would experience, the way reincarnation has theories of multiple lives, even if there's no memory, no karma to that.
Yeah.
And in a non-material, the one I have, the theories of all the evidence I've been studying, it still seems like consciousness goes on infinitely in both material and non-material forms. I have such a hard time wrapping my mind around the concept of infinity, both in terms of time and space. Like, you take a rocket, does our space go on infinitely? Thoughts on infinity, however you want to explain it, because my human mind has a very hard time wrapping itself around the concept of infinity. So however you interpret it, however you want to say it, what's infinity?
So I hope you're prepared for another hour of conversation, because I have multiple tattoos of I have multiple tattoos of I don't know if you can see that, and I have one, two, three, four, five infinity signs tattooed on me. One of which is an Ouroboros, which is a snake eating its own tail. It's a symbol of eternity. And I have an Ankh tattoo, which is a symbol of eternal life, which is also the same kind of concept, eternity. And this, I don't know if you can see this. This is an Aleph sub omega. This is a mathematical expression for a very large type of infinity. Suffice to say, I'm into the idea of infinity. So most people don't realize that there's actually different sizes of infinity. So the word infinite, yeah, I know. Ready? Strap yourself in. So the word infinite, like invisible, it means not finite. Like invisible is not visible. Infinite means not finite. So that is a concept that humans have struggled with for a long time. But if you think about it, infinite, all it says is that it's not finite. So for thousands of years, the idea of the infinite was just that it was beyond anything finite. It's more than finite. It goes on forever. And that's the understanding that most people have of infinity, that just goes on forever. And as you mentioned, it's kind of hard to conceptualize. There's a great book by Rudy Rucker called Infinity and the Mind, which is it's a little dense. It takes some thought, but it's really, I mean, really, really, really good. Infinity and the Mind. And anyway, about 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, a mathematician named Georg Cantor discovered that there's different sizes of infinity. So in other words, when we say infinite, not finite, that's actually a very poor descriptor, because it's like asking, I use the example in my classroom, like if you ask the question, how many people are in this room? And you answer by saying, there are not 6 people in this room. Well, that's true. There may not be 6 people, but in fact, it doesn't actually give you any more information. It's just that they're not 6. So infinite is like that. Not finite, fine. But it turns out that if you consider the mathematics of numbers, which are larger than any finite number, it turns out that first off, there's multiple ways of looking at it. One is that there's two types of numbers: ordinal numbers and cardinal numbers. Cardinal numbers have to do with how many of something there are, and ordinal numbers have to do with the order of something, like first, second, third. And in the finite world, these are pretty much interchangeable. Like if you think of people who finish a foot race, you could say this guy came in first, this guy came in second, this guy came in third, or you could say, who are the winners? This is number one, number two, number three, and it's sort of, four people came in ahead of me, therefore I'm the fifth. Like it all is perfectly interchangeable, or between ordinal and cardinal. In transfinite number theory, we say transfinite rather than infinite, because trans meaning beyond finite, the number theory beyond finite numbers. In transfinite number theory, there's actually a distinction between transfinite ordinal numbers and transfinite cardinal numbers. So in other words, if you imagine the first, second, third, fourth, etc., like forever, you could ask, what is the next number after that? And the so-called first limit ordinal number is this number. I don't know if you can see it. It's omega. It's the Greek letter omega. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's the Greek letter lowercase omega. So the lowercase Greek letter omega is used to indicate the first, what's called the first limit ordinal. So again, it's the first number. If you were to say first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc., for all of the numbers possible, what's the next one that would come after that? And that's called omega. But then you have what's called omega plus 1, which is a larger number. It's like it comes after that. So it's not the same number, right? And then omega plus 2 is 2 after that, and then omega plus 3, and omega plus 4, and omega plus 5. So the omega plus 7th, the omega plus 8th, and so forth. And then you can get to the point where you're going omega plus omega, which is 2 omega. And these are all distinct transfinite ordinal numbers, all right? Now, here's where it gets even weirder. If you ask, if I throw in marbles in a bucket, I throw the first one in, I throw the second one in, I throw up to the omega-th one, I've thrown the omega-th one in. The question is, how many marbles are in the bucket? Well, the number of marbles in the bucket is a cardinal number. And the Hebrew letter aleph is used by Georg Cantor to indicate the transfinite cardinal numbers, and aleph with a subscript of 0, aleph sub 0. So cardinal number is counting how many of something there are, as opposed to the order that they're in. So when I say how many students are in the room, there are 6. But if I have them line up, then there's many different ways of ordering them, but there's still only 6 of them. So ordering gives you sort of more information in some sense. So the first transfinite cardinal number is called aleph sub 0, and it is the number of what we call natural numbers or counting numbers. So the normal numbers that you count with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so forth, if you were to count all of them and say how many are there are aleph sub 0 many of them. And what's interesting is there are aleph sub 0 many counting numbers, but if you think about the number line, right, you have all the counting numbers in the number line. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, right? But in between the counting numbers, there's all the fractions. So there's like a half and a third. And if you start thinking a half, a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, a seventh, and so forth, if you just put every number, like take the reciprocal of any number, like 1 becomes 1, but then 2 becomes 1/2, 3 becomes 1/3, 4 becomes 1/4, and so forth, you can immediately see that there's got to be at least as many fractions as there are whole numbers, right? Because every single whole number, you just flip it, put 1 over that number, and you get a fraction. And there's all these other fractions. So it's like if I have 1/3, I can also have 2/3, and that's a whole different number, right? Or I can have 5/3, or I can have 107 thirds. I can have all these things with, okay, so here's where it gets weird, as though it's not weird enough. It turns out there are exactly as many fractions as there are whole numbers. Even though it seems like there's got to be a gajillion many more fractions than there are whole numbers. It turns out you can come up with an equation that takes every single whole number and maps it to exactly one fraction and no more, so that every single fraction is accounted for and every single whole number is accounted for, and they're all in a one-to-one relationship. So there's exactly as many fractions as there are whole numbers. So it turns out there's exactly as many fractions as there are whole numbers, and that number is Aleph sub 0. Now here's where it gets even weirder. If you look at all the numbers on the number line and you fill in all the fractions, so there's no matter how close you zoom in, there's always going to be infinitely many fractions in any little piece. There's always smaller and smaller and smaller fractions. It turns out that if you take any single piece of the number line, like all the numbers between 1 and 2, right? All the fractions between 1 and 2. It turns out that there are exactly as many fractions between 1 and 2 as there are fractions in total. Now think about that for a second. Picture the number line. You have all the fractions filling in the whole number line. There's exactly as many fractions between 1 and 2 as there are total. You can easily come up with a rule that assigns every fraction between 1 and 2 with a fraction on the whole number line in a one-to-one relationship. There's exactly as many. It seems like there should be like a lot more in the whole number line, but they're not. That's Aleph sub 0 is such a large number that it's large enough to sort of contain itself in this way that there's exactly as many fractions. It doesn't matter how small you go on the number line. The number of fractions in any interval on the number line is the same as the number of fractions that there are total, which is the same as the number of whole numbers. Now, here's where, and I'll stop, I promise, after this. Well, no, there's two more things I want to say. If you look at all the numbers on the number line, fractions as well as things that are called irrational numbers, numbers that can't be expressed as a fraction, like the square root of 2 is irrational. There's no way to express it as a fraction. If you write it out in digits, it goes 1.41, and it keeps continuing forever and ever and ever. The number pi is probably the most famous irrational number. Pi goes 3.14159, and it just keeps going forever and ever and ever. It never stops, and it never just keeps repeating. That is a characteristic of irrational numbers. A rational number will either stop or repeat. Like 1/3, you can write it as a decimal as 0.33333, and the threes continue forever. Any rational number can be expressed either as a fraction or as a decimal that terminates or repeats. But an irrational number goes on forever. So there are two types of numbers on the number line. There are rational numbers, which are fractions, or whole numbers are a type of rational number. And there are these irrational numbers. And it turns out that there are strictly more irrational numbers than there are rational numbers. In fact, if you were to color in all the rational numbers in red on the number line and color in all the irrational numbers blue, most people think, well, maybe it would look like purple or something. If you were to color in all the rational numbers red and all the irrational numbers blue, the whole number line would look blue. There are so many more irrational numbers than there are rational numbers that it makes the rational numbers look as though there are 0 of them, comparatively speaking. So you now have access to two different sizes of infinity. The number of whole numbers is the smallest cardinal transfinite number, and that's called Aleph sub 0. And then there's a number larger than that, which is called the cardinality of the continuum. And the cardinality of the continuum is how many real numbers there are. And it turns out that you can take all possible recombinations of all the rational numbers and get what's called a power set. And the power set of Aleph sub 0 is called Aleph sub 1. And Aleph sub 1 is so big that you can consider the cardinality of the continuum to be the same size as Aleph sub 1. And it's a uniquely larger size of infinity. But then you can take all possible combinations of Aleph sub 1 and make a power set and call that Aleph sub 2. And that's a strictly larger type of, and you can keep doing this. Aleph sub 10, Aleph sub 15, and so forth. So the tattoo on my left hand, Aleph sub omega, is actually the smallest cardinal number, which is provably larger than the number of real numbers on the real number line, the cardinality of the continuum. And I don't expect you to have followed all that. But to provide a simpler answer, this concept of infinity is a deeply rich concept. It's much
Wow.
more rich than you would think of, even though you think of it as being profound. It actually is even more profound than that. It's a deep and very, very, very powerful subject, and
Oh my
it's one that's
God.
only really been mathematically explored in the past like 150 years.
This added so much more to it than I thought. I'm gonna be thinking about this. I'm gonna be breaking this down. I mean, now I'm excited when I get to edit this. Further, you said ask you at the end to go a little further into your math theorem explanation. But if you're exhausted after
No,
this,
no,
do
no.
not
It's
feel obligated.
like consciousness and infinite transfinite numbers. It's one of the things I could talk about at length. The short version is there's a function. The Riemann hypothesis is an assertion in a type of number called the complex numbers that we talked about before. Complex numbers are on a plane, so they have a horizontal and a vertical component to them. There's two aspects. The horizontal measures the so-called real number, and the vertical measures the so-called imaginary number. And there's a function called the zeta function. A function is a rule that takes in one number and spits out another number. And the zeta function is a complex function, which means it takes a point in the plane as an input and it spits out a point in the plane as an output. All right. There are certain values that you can plug into this function that are called zeros of the function. And what that means is that there are certain places on the plane where if you plug in that point, the function will spit out a zero, which is to say the origin or the center of the plane. So if a particular input value will yield an output value of zero, it's called a zero of the function. There are two types of zeros of the zeta function. There's the trivial zeros. They're all in a line that go out horizontally, and it's very easy to see where they are if you know the structure of this function. If you know how to express this function, you can see them. You can see exactly where they show up in a regular pattern. That's fine. Those are called trivial zeros. The non-trivial zeros are there's known to be infinitely many non-trivial zeros. And it's known that all the non-trivial zeros occur in this one vertical strip in the complex plane that's called the critical strip. The Riemann hypothesis is the claim that all the non-trivial zeros of this zeta function lie in a straight line in the complex plane that has a real part equal to 1/2. So that means if you could find all of these numbers, which there's infinitely many, so it's like you could probably never find them all, but if you could, they would all lie in this vertical line. Now, this hypothesis has been verified for the first like trillion zeros, like the trillion closest one we found have all been in that line, and it's known that all of them are in this strip somewhere, and it's known that there are infinitely many on this line. And what's weird to a non-mathematician is, okay, if there's infinitely many on the line, doesn't that mean it's got to be all of them? Well, no. In fact, it's been proven that something like 40% of them have to be on that line. So there's infinitely many on the line, and that represents at least 40% of all of them that are out there. But the claim is that every single one of them, 100% of them, are actually on that line. So that's called the Riemann hypothesis. And I have a proof that I have a paper which I believe to prove that I actually don't say anything about where the zeros are. I say that it's known that they're all in this strip, so I say that they can't be here or here. They can't be to the left or to the right of that line. So the only remaining place is for them to be on that line. And why would anyone care? The location of the zeros in the complex plane, the zeros of the zeta function, is intimately tied to the location of prime numbers among regular whole numbers. And prime numbers are numbers which can only be divided by themselves and 1. So like 7 is a prime number, but 6 is not, because 6 is divisible by 2 and 3, as well as 6 and 1. The location of the prime numbers among regular numbers is not in general known, and is intimately, deeply tied into how we do internet security and cryptography. So a lot of people are interested in the Riemann hypothesis because they think that in order to solve the Riemann hypothesis, you would have to learn more about the location of these zeros in order to confirm that they're all in this line. And that if you knew more about the location of the zeros, you would then know more about the location of prime numbers among regular numbers. and that could somehow be useful for breaking cryptography or maybe making cryptography stronger or something like that. My proof does not at all address the location of the zeros. It doesn't say anything about where they are at all. It only says where they're not. So I avoid that whole situation. But anyway, so I said 2 minutes, but maybe that was like the 10-minute version.
Oh, no, it's all fascinating. Even myself, even having had this conversation, I'm just going to keep listening to little bits and processing. So,
yeah, it'll be a 2-hour episode, but you have to listen to it 15 times to really get it. It's like a Faulkner novel.
Exactly. So, listeners are going to have to listen to this again and again and again. So, okay. Is there anything you want to add that I haven't asked you? Anything else?
Oh, geez. Anything I want to add that you haven't asked me? I've added so much that you didn't ask me already in my long answers.
No, I love it.
I guess I would say if I could take away anything, if I could ask your listeners to take away anything from this conversation, it is to consider, like Bob Monroe said, that the possibility, not like it's the truth, but just as a hypothesis. What if I am more than my physical body? And if I am more than my physical body, what does that look like, and how can I access that aspect of myself? And I would encourage your listeners to download the free app from the Monroe Institute. It's called Expand Beyond Meditation. It's a free app. It uses the latest technology, and the technology that the Monroe Institute developed uses sound technology to induce altered states of consciousness. They've been at it for 50 years. If you've heard of binaural beats, they're the ones who discovered the brain effects of binaural beats. So there's the sort of like the OG of the binaural beat world. And they use now binaural beats, and they use phase modulation. They use a whole different number of things that they call Monroe sound science. And I encourage people to try it, because you have to wear stereo headphones in order for it to work. But you can actually experience yourself as being more than or beyond your physical body without having a near-death experience. And once you have this beginning awareness that I am more than my physical body, or I am maybe more than my physical body. Bob Monroe would famously say, don't believe a word that I say. Go out and discover for yourself. Experience it for yourself, because then you won't need to believe me, because you will know what's true in your own experience. And I'm a big believer in that. And so I encourage people to ask themselves, if I am more than my physical body, how might that manifest itself? How could I start to catch, like, the non-physical aspects of myself I obviously can't interact with physically. So how might I start to open up my awareness to those aspects of myself, if in fact they exist? And like I said, meditation, I think, and especially meditation with Monroe Sound Science, is, in my opinion, the easiest way to do it. But, do what works for you.
Wonderful. Well, this has been an eye-opening, fascinating, deep, entertaining, all of the above conversation. So, where can our listeners find you, follow you? Are there any books you want them to know about? Anything you want to share?
Yeah, thank you. So I have a website, skywaterpeace.com, and there's not much on it. I use it to schedule. I'm an outreach trainer for the Monroe Institute, and I put my people can do a virtual workshop with me, which is like a weekend workshop, and when I'm hosting them, they'll be on my website. I wrote some books that have nothing to do with the subject at hand, except tangentially. I wrote a novel called Sunflowers in the Afternoon. That's available on Amazon, or anywhere your books are sold or whatever. I wrote a running book. I'm also an ultramarathon runner. I wrote a book called The Lazy Man's Guide to Ultramarathon Running. So if you're interested in knowing how you can run long distances without putting in much effort, then that book is for you. There's an entire chapter on the value of dark chocolate. So people like that. I do highly recommend the book. There's a 30 page book that was published by the U.S. Army, U.S. Army intelligence investigating the Monroe Institute in the 1980s. It's called Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process. And I actually published, I took that and I typeset it, because you can get it like online as like a photocopy of a typewritten document, and it's it's fine, but you can get a nicer copy for like $3. So anyway, I made that available online. Analysis and assessment of the gateway process, and that is a fascinating book because it talks about the gateway process at the Monroe Institute, but it gets into how could these things be happening? How could these out-of-body experiences be grounded in physics? And it gets into all this analysis about quantum mechanics and all this stuff. It's really, really, really interesting. I guess that's I guess anything that were significant that I wanted to put out there, I would probably put on my website, skywaterpeace.com. But as of right now, there's not much other than like a list of my books and links to my workshops. but help yourself, by all
People
means.
might like those. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Liz. I really appreciate it.
Hey, everyone. I'm really excited to let you know about the science and spirituality salons I'm now hosting. During these intimate events, a scientifically verified psychic medium will give all of you readings, and I will give a talk on the science and evidence that changed my mind about an afterlife. This will also be an amazing opportunity to get to meet some of you in person or virtually, and to share more about all the science and data that transformed my worldview and got me through my worst days. These can be hosted in your home, in a nearby cafe with a private room, or they can even be virtual. I've hosted a few already, and they were really special, fascinating, emotional, evidential. So if you're interested in getting a small group together over dinner, brunch, drinks, coffee, to learn more about the science and to get evidential medium readings, send me an email at hello@wtfjusthappened.net and put science and spirituality in the title. To get more information on what the fuck just happened, go to WTFJustHappened.net. There you can order my book, WTF Just Happened, A Sciencey-Skeptic Explores Grief, Healing, and Evidence of an Afterlife. You can learn all about how I came to conclude that there most likely is an afterlife, but you can also learn about the early stages of my grief and the amazing, fascinating people I met along the way. You can read about how much I harassed the mediums and scientists trying to get evidence to see if the mediums were cheating and see if what everyone was saying actually was true. You can also subscribe to our newsletter to stay updated on any new developments and any interesting new what the fuck updates. So if you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us wherever you get your podcasts. It makes such a difference, especially for a new podcast like this one. And if any of you have had a crazy what the fuck yourself, have any questions, feedback, or just want to say hey, reach out on either Instagram at WTF_just_happened_, or email me at hello@WTFJustHappened.net. I love hearing from all of you. It makes my day hearing your stories and questions and feedback and all of it. And remember, you don't have to draw any final conclusions as you wonder, what the fuck just happened?